Some landscapes don't just grow crops, they grow silence. They grow fear. In the middle of Indiana corn country, the rows close in by midsummer, tall as cathedral walls, the sound of the world swallowed whole in a sea of green. For generations, those fields promise life, food, family, futures tied to the soil. But beginning in the summer of 1989, Clinton County learned those same fields could also hide something else, something older, something waiting. Livestock started to vanish first, then people. Whole families traced to gas station receipts and gravel mile roads, but never seen again. And then, the children. Locals called her the Corn Witch, a name half-whispered in schoolyard rhymes and muttered over coffee in town diners, a figure blamed for everything that disappeared between the tassels and the turn rows. The county sheriff's reports called it missing persons. The farmers just called it evil. This story begins like all good horror does, with ordinary people taking an ordinary road trip, a husband and wife on their way to a wedding, passing through a place most folks never notice. But in Clinton County, there are rules the outsiders don't know. Rules like, don't go into the corn after sundown, because she might be there, waiting. They didn't know the rules, and because of that, they came face to face with what still waits in those fields. This is a story about folklore that bleeds into fact, about small towns that carry legends like scars, and about what happens when you discover the monster in the storybook is real. Welcome to Dust and Echoes. My name is James Cawley. Each week I tell you an original story, ones pulled from the deep places where memory, rumor, and nightmare overlap. Lean close to the fire, listen to the corn rattle in the wind, and remember, when the tassels shake and the daylight's torn, the corn witch waits inside the rows of corn. Tonight, I call this story The Corn Witch. I dedicate this episode to my stepfather Timo. Keep riding tall on the other side. Until our paths cross again, I'll be thinking of you. By the summer of 1989, the cats were going first, then the chickens and the ducklings, then a whole pen of feeder pigs from Mr. Garvin's property along County Road 500 West. Folks blamed the coyotes at first. The county even offered $10 an ear, which brought the coyote hunters with rifles and spotlights in their pickups. But even after the last known coyote in the county was chased down in July, the strange animal thefts continued until everything changed the next year. In July of 1990, the first person vanished when the corn tassels stood high. This was a time of year when the fields became green cathedrals stretching across the landscape, and the pollen shed drifted like sulfur dust onto porches and truck hoods. But then, more missing people. By the summer of 91, the missing persons reports outnumbered livestock calls in Clinton County. A family of 3 from Indianapolis were last seen passing through on their way to visit family in Idaho. Family members called the sheriff and they traced the last credit card purchase to a gas station in Lebanon, Indiana, but there were never any more credit card charges down the road. The police started to patrol the county roads, thinking they might have a serial killer or drifter stalking the community. They had other strange disappearances, one after another, such as Eddie Rappert, a feed and seed delivery man from Frankfurt, driving a straight truck carrying bags stamped with Pioneer and DeKalb. He left Circleville at noon and never checked in at Pickard. His dispatcher figured he'd stopped to eat, but Eddie was never seen again. Vic and Andrea Klein, newlyweds from Kankakee, Illinois, headed toward Indianapolis for a long weekend. His mother called the state police when they missed dinner Friday. Their Chevette didn't show up on any lot or tow yard. Ramon Ray Louise was just 19, a college kid hitching a ride east to Purdue to attend a campus tour. Last seen buying a sports drink from a clerk at the Shell in Lebanon, telling her he'd be crossing the county before she'd seen him thumbing a ride headed out towards State Road 28. When the kids started going missing, the press started to cover the story. That was when the locals knew they had a real problem. 3 children vanished into the corn in the last days of summer. Tessa Arnold was outside her dad's shop playing on a bike when she disappeared. Chuck Nestor was playing on his swing set in the backyard the last time his aunt saw him. And Jessie Peters was last seen riding her bike from her friend's house one evening, just 3/4 a mile from her home. They all were next to a cornfield, but there was one boy that escaped being taken, and his story would rattle the entire community and spark a legend that would never die. Jimmy Goodwin was known as a good, honest boy who came from a prominent farming family. He came running out of the field into his grandfather's shop yard, shirt stuck to his back with sweat, eyes wide with panic, and he had a large scratch mark raked down his left arm. His words were disjointed, and his mind was a blur of confusion and fear. He didn't stop looking over his shoulder as he ran. He found his grandfather in the machine shed, greasing an old combine's axle. The boy burst into tears as he blurted it out. "There was a scary woman out in the corn," he stuttered. "She said she talked to Mama, and I was supposed to help her find her lost kittens. But I think she was a witch. And when I wouldn't go in the corn, she reached out with a long arm and tried to grab me." His grandfather's eyes were full of concern. "A woman's out in our corn?" his grandfather said. But he already had a hand on the boy's shoulder, squeezing too tight. He then noticed the boy's deep scratched and bleeding arm as the boy held it out. The grandfather's face went pale. "Yes, she tried to grab me. See, she's out in the East Acre," Jimmy said, sobbing. "She smiled. Her teeth were broken and yellow." The grandfather stepped into the doorway where he looked, eyes still sharp for his age, and listened. Heat lay heavy on the yard. Crickets filled the silence. Nothing but a jungle of corn in every direction he could see. A sight that he grew up with, that he loved and lived in. But now his skin began to crawl, as he knew what the boy told him was true. This boy had never lied his whole life, and never would. He knew that to be the truth. The old man felt something move under that quiet. He first grabbed his shotgun, and then thinking of all the missing people around here, he went to the house and phoned the sheriff. Deputies followed Jimmy to where he was attacked in the field. The dog handler let the hound sniff Jimmy's shirt. The dogs bayed at the edge, then went mute at the first row and wouldn't push in. They'd gone into burned-out houses before. They'd chased bad men across creeks and into junkyards and into these same fields. But this time, they lay down at the row edge and whined. The dogs would not enter the corn. The deputies went in themselves. Flashlights were needed even at midday because of the darkness deep within the tall corn. Under the canopy, the dirt ran black and cool, littered with fallen leaves and tassels. You could hear your own breath, the wind in the stalks, and the squeak of the corn. And that was all. They found tracks inside the corn, footprints made by bare feet, embedded in the soft soil. The deputies followed the tracks until the rows ended at State Road 28, where tar ran soft at the edges and heat shimmered. The prints broke apart into gravel and vanished into the asphalt of the road. That fall, the schools repeated what the mothers had already said. Stay out of the corn. Don't trust anyone you don't know. Don't travel anywhere alone. The coon hunters kept the timber and creek bottoms far away. The coyote boys stopped their midnight runs. Everyone was staying far away from the cornfields. Not even farmhands adjusting irrigation drips dared enter the fields at night during those years. As children do, the local kids made a rhyme for it. Because that's exactly what kids do when they are scared. When the tassels shake and the daylight's torn. The corn witch waits inside the rows of corn. She'll smile with broken teeth and yellow grin, and if you're not careful, she'll pull you in. Never to be seen again. They whispered it on school buses, chanted it under blankets at sleepovers. Teenagers drove into the dark field lands at night and dared each other to take 10 paces into the corn and stand still saying it out loud, until they heard breathing behind them, or until they felt long fingers scratch the back of their necks. The families of the missing ones all watched the edges of the fields by day and listened hopefully for the rattle of doorknobs at night that never came. But by harvest season of 91, when the corn was cut and only the stubble of stalks filled the endless landscape, where once the tall ocean of corn once stood, nothing was ever found in the fields. The county went on anyway. because that's what small towns and rural farming communities do. They push on, they band together, and carry on with life. But just before the harvest season of that next year, the entire world would know about the corn witch. When people covered in blood stumbled out in front of Mr. Geeson's truck just before midnight on County Road 500 West in Clinton County. On that night, all was known about the corn witch, and everything changed forever. The shell on the north edge of Lebanon was the last reliable stop before the corn took over. After that, it was narrow blacktop and fields that seemed to go on forever. Jenson McBride stood with a forearm on the Chevy roof while the pump clicked and the heat baked through his shirt. He was 40, 6'5", and heavy in a way people still called big, to be polite. 340 now. The weight didn't hide the old build, shoulders that used to matter on Saturdays, legs that still looked like they could move a pile. He'd been a lineman at IU when Garrett was his roommate and best man in waiting. Now he sold cars in Lafayette and told stories that started with back when more than he liked. Inside the car, Susan had the MapQuest printouts folded open on her knees. The corners were wrinkled where coffee had dried. 38. 2 years younger than Jenson, a cheerleader once and still sharp at the edges. They'd married on tuition and hope and stayed that way. No kids, not for lack of trying. Lately she felt time tilting. She'd be 39 in October. After that, 40. And the light at this time of year. A late August light with a first thin cool threading through heat felt like it was telling the truth about seasons. If we don't get moving, we'll miss the photos. Garrett will pout. Jenson hung the nozzle, screwed the cap. Garrett's been pouting since '96. He'll live. They rolled south out of town and then west, cutting off toward the grid. The landscape flattened and widened, and then went narrow again as the corn stood up on both sides, tassels browned and rattling, a month or so before combines and grain carts and augers. The air had that sweet, grassy edge to it from shed and silk, and every time the wind pushed, the fields moved in long, low waves like a green ocean. Jenson flicked his old Zippo in the cup holder. Susan watched power poles pass at a clean mile apart and counted without meaning to. "Tell me again why we didn't stay on the interstate," she said. "Because the interstate is backed up by the split, and this cuts time. We go straight through and drop out near Spencer. It's cleaner. This is the part of the map where the lines all look like veins, and none of them have names. And if we get lost, we won't get lost," he said. Paper rasped under her fingers, driving halfway across the country for a wedding. "You'd do anything for Garrett, wouldn't you?" "Sometimes I think you love him more than you love me," she joked. He shrugged. "What can I say? He's always been there for me, ever since we were teenagers." Out the window, the 30-inch rows made tight walls. Tile inlets peppered the ditches, little grated mouths where water whispered even after a dry week. They didn't see a car for 10 minutes, then 15. A single farmhouse roof floated in the distance, half swallowed by the corn. Susan rolled her window down halfway. The sound came in like surf, then settled. "Feels like being underwater," she said. "Like if you screamed, no one would hear it." Jenson didn't answer. He kept hunting mailboxes and road numbers, counting down to a turn he'd circled on the printout. They found something else first. An old farm truck sat canted at a bad angle on the gravel shoulder. The right rear tire was folded under, shredded sidewall. The truck pointed slightly into the ditch like it had slid there. A woman's thin legs stuck out from beneath the frame. Her dress hem brushed gravel. "Stop," Susan said. Jenson's foot lifted and then eased back. He let them roll on. "Somebody local will help." She slapped his bicep. "What happened to my big, strong man with values?" He exhaled like it cost him, checked the mirror, and braked hard enough to dust the road. He backed the Chevy until they were behind the truck, hazard lights ticking. By the time he climbed out, the woman had wriggled free. She was small and bent, skin the color of paper with old stains. Her dress had been white once. Her hair was a tangle of gray ropes. She came around the fender with a limp that looked practiced. "I didn't think anybody from out of town would stop," she said. Her voice was flat and dry as split cornstalk. "We're headed to a wedding in Bloomington," Jenson said. "Saw you needed a hand." Her eyes slid past him to the Chevy. Susan lifted a hand in a polite little wave. The woman didn't wave back. Her face stayed emptied out. "Got any kids in that car?" she asked. "Just us." She nodded once, like that answered something. Then she eased herself up into the cab and stared straight ahead, hands silent on the wheel. Jenson set the jack, cranked the truck up, spun lug nuts free. He'd done this 1,000 times under the fluorescent hum of the dealership's service bay. The tire came off, the spare went on, the flat got heaved into the truck bed. Bags of fertilizer slumped along the rails, familiar brands and numbers, enough to dress a big garden or a small field edge. He rapped the door. "You're good to roll." She didn't blink. "Ma'am?" From the Chevy, he heard Susan's door hinge squeal. The sound seemed to tug at something in the old woman. Her eyes turned to him like a doll's head on a string. The corners of her mouth pulled up slow, careful, until it made something you might call a smile if you'd never seen one. "One more kindness," she said. "Unload those bags for me. My garden can't wait. Farmhand's under the weather." "We're short on time," Jenson said, rubbing the back of his neck. Susan stepped up with her best small-town manners. "I'm Susan." The woman glanced at the offered hand, but didn't take it. The smile flattened. "Follow me," she said, and turned the key. The old straight six coughed and caught. She pulled back into the lane without checking the mirror. Jenson watched her tailgate. "This is stupid," he said. "We should go." "Look at her," Susan said. "She's alone. It's one chore. Then we go." He swore under his breath, but slid behind the wheel and followed. They turned onto a 2-track lane cut between a thin line of cottonwoods and a wall of corn, ruts sunk deep from tractors and grain trucks. In places they were a couple of feet down, the high center ridge like a spine. If he dropped an axle into the wrong groove, they'd sit like a beached thing until a farmer dragged them out with a chain. The air cooled under the cottonwoods and then warmed again where the sun hit the open. The corn breathed. They threaded forward slow. The roofline showed first, a point of gray above the rows. Then the house shouldered up out of the field. 2 stories from the 1920s or 30s, wood silvered and curling. Porch slouched like a tired back. A chicken coop leaned crooked with its wire cut. A pond behind the house lay still and green with algae, rimmed in cattails. Beyond it, a collapsed barn. Beyond that, more corn to the horizon. The woman parked and went in without a word. "Really? I'm telling you, this lady is off her rocker or something. She just abandons us after dragging us down a crappy dirt road for miles," Jenson said, shaking his head. "And you're the one on my case for taking too long at the gas pump and missing pictures." Susan shrugged. "I guess my heart is just too big. She probably just had to use the bathroom really bad." He rolled his eyes. "Stay in the car. I'll unload these fast, and we'll get the hell out of here." He could see what had to be the garden around the corner of the house. He hauled the first sack around the side. In late August, the beds should have been throwing tomatoes and peppers and late beans. Here there were only a few yellowed vines, a row of weeds, and bare spots like something had been clawed up and taken. He dropped the sack and turned for another, and saw her, at the top of the porch steps, knife in her hand. For a second his brain put it in the wrong drawer. She wanted him to slit the bags. Then the drawer slammed shut. She went down the steps slow and careful, eyes on the Chevy where Susan sat with the map spread. Then she ran. "Susan!" he shouted, his voice ripped raw. "Window up!" Susan looked up to see the old woman not just moving fast, but sprinting towards her with the knife. Her eyes were wide and her lips peeled back, revealing broken, gnarled teeth. She didn't have time to scream. She just reacted to Jenson's yell. The Chevy had a window crank, a lever that needed to be spun manually to roll the window up. She dropped the map and frantically began cranking, as the woman closed the space between them. The old woman's scream came across the yard shredded and high like something broken in her throat. She hit the door with her free hand and drove the knife at the gap. Steel flashed. The blade punched through the narrowing slit and chopped air an inch from Susan's face. The glass pinched the blade. The woman yanked and freed it with a metal shriek. Her eyes dropped to the lock peg still standing. A slow joy moved through her face. "Lock it!" Jenson yelled, already sprinting, already knowing he was late. Susan slammed the peg down as the handle jerked. The latch clacked. The woman moved to the rear door. Susan lunged over the seat, slamming pegs one after another. The handle rattled, then stopped. "Put it down!" Jenson bellowed. He snatched the truck jack from the bed and raised it like a bat. "Put the knife down!" The woman's hair hung in ropes. Blood streaked her palm where she'd slipped, smeared red across the glass in a fan. She looked at him, and something like delight touched her lips. She dropped the knife to the Chevy's front tire and stabbed. Air ripped out in a rush. Hiss. She drifted 2 steps and stabbed the rear. Hiss. Then she was moving, fast as a feral thing, across the yard and into the corn. The field swallowed her with a dry whisper. The sun was dropping, and that first thin cool was coming into the heat. The light went the color of old brews. Jenson stood there shaking with the jack over his head, chest heaving, and felt the country pull tight around them. The lane out was long. The corn was closer than it looked, and the house behind them had a door that stood cracked open like a mouth. Susan opened the passenger door and ran to Jenson, not taking her eyes from where the old crazy woman ran into the dark wall of corn. "What the hell? What are we going to do? She is insane." Jenson still had the jack in his fist. His forearm burned from holding it. Adrenaline had drained away and left the weight, so he leaned it against the porch railing. "She's out in the corn, just watching us." "I know it." "She's not just watching." Jenson's voice came low. "She staged all of this. The truck on the shoulder, the flat. Led us back here. She's planning on us walking that road. This is a trap." "So we're just going to walk into it then?" Susan snapped. "Take a mile-long stroll between corn walls with a knife-crazy maniac that knows every inch of it, waiting to jump out and ambush us? I don't want to walk down that road either. But it's getting dark, and we have to do something quick. Let's see if she has a phone or something in there." He pointed at the house with his chin. She raised her eyebrows at the front door, hanging crooked and cracked open. What if her plan was this? Leave it open like bait so we walk right in, and she shuts the world behind us? Jenson looked from the lane to the rows, then to the dark slit of the doorway. "Okay, calm down. I'm just trying to figure this out. Either way, she knows this place, we don't, and she's counting on that. If we walk, she jumps out at us in the rows, and we will have to fight. If we just stand here, she'll just wait until it gets dark, and then we'll have to go inside, or down the road anyway. Inside, at least, we can defend ourselves. Block a door or something until morning if we can't find a phone." "That's not a plan." "That's the plot to a crappy drive-in horror movie." He shrugged, keeping his eyes on the darkening corn. He could feel her watching them from inside that darkness. Susan's throat worked. But she knew he was right, and they were limited on options. The front door was already more than halfway open, and he could see into the yellow-tinted gloom inside. He pressed the edge with his forearm, and it swung a little farther. Slow. Creaking. There was dirty, dust-covered stuff everywhere. Old blankets hid who knows what, and furniture stacked. Piles of papers and old garbage bags. He wondered if she actually lived in here. You'd have to be crazy to live like this. Air rolled out thick and hot as they crossed the threshold. Ammonia, mildew, the sweet sour of rot and garbage. It stuck to the back of the tongue. Susan lifted the crook of her arm to her mouth and gagged softly. "I know. This is bad. We can't be in here long. Stay close, and let's just see if there is a phone or something." The windows were smothered under layers of plastered newspaper and plastic. Whatever light made it in died quick in a sick yellow haze. A single path had been blazed, cut through stacked newspapers and split garbage bags. The carpet underfoot was wet and soft, pumping up stinky black liquid around their feet, squishing beneath every step. Mice skittered inside the piles and were gone. The house creaked, and they could feel the floorboards sag and dip as they moved forwards. This place was a death trap. "My God," Susan whispered, more of a prayer than a statement. On a buckled side table sat a dust-coated rotary phone, the color of old bone. Jenson lifted the receiver. Nothing. He traced the line to the base and found the cord cut clean, tight to the body, no chew marks, no fray. Deliberate. He shook his head and replaced the receiver. "Let's go out the back. Maybe if we go that way, we can—" They both froze. A noise came from the porch, and they both turned to see the door slam shut, then a locking noise from outside. "Oh my God, Jens! Look!" Susan pointed to the bottom of the doorframe. There was a 1-inch crack between the sagging carpet and the bottom of the door, where they could see the vehicles and the dark corn beyond. And something else. The old woman's face was pressed to the ground beyond staring back in at them. She was laughing. Then she was gone. With the door closed, the darkness inside was intensified. He looked for something, anything to use as a weapon. But besides the phone receiver, he could not see anything, and that was useless. Their feet squished in the dampness, and they used their legs to feel the edges of the path. Finally, he reached the door, and not wanting to put his face or hands on the wet carpet, he bent down as far as he could and looked under the door. Nothing. The porch was clear. He could see the corn darkening into night beyond. His hand slowly grabbed the knob and pulled. Nothing. Somehow locked from the outside. "There's our way out. I'll break the damn thing with a chair or something." He pointed past the mounds of garbage to the newspaper and plastic-covered window at the other side of the room. He tried to find a way to step and realized they'd have to climb all this clutter if there was any chance of making it across the room. Susan bent down and lifted one of the wet blankets covering what looked like a table. "What the hell is this?" she said, bending down. He bent and pulled out his lighter and flicked it on. It was a tunnel of sorts, carved under the mountain of garbage inside this room. Just then, a sound came from deep within that dark tunnel, paper dragging on paper. Clanks, slow, intentional. Then stillness. Susan's fingers latched his sleeve. "She's in there." Susan dropped the damp cloth and they backed away. The noises were still coming towards them. Swish, clank, swish, clank. Closer and closer. They backed away from the tunnel in the dark. Something was going to come out of it. And they were scared. The garbage path took them to the other side of the room, where they had not yet gone. From here, he could see the back door was not an option. Piles of old appliances and tables and more garbage blocked any movement out the back of the house. It led them to a small hallway. At the end of it, what looked like a basement door sat swollen in its frame. It wasn't open, but since the path led there, it was the only other way out. The smell gathered heavier here, iron and sweet rot layered over ammonia until it burned the eyes. Susan shook her head, panic skittering up her voice. "No, not there. Please, I can't." Clank! Swish! Clank! The noises grew louder. Then they saw a hand slowly lift the wet, rotted blanket from inside the tunnel. It was her hand, and in the darkness they could see the shine of her dark eyes, and she was smiling at them. "Go!" Jens pulled her backwards as they heard the knife scrape on the floor and running behind them, bare feet squishing on the swampy carpet. He put his hand on the knob. It was cold, with condensation, slick, like a jar pulled from a cellar fridge. He braced his shoulder and pulled. The wood scraped the jam with a long, wet groan and then gave. The crack widened, and the draft came stronger, rolling over them. The stairs showed as a steep throat in the darkness. He did not see a switch or pull for a light. Even if there was, he was sure the power was cut in here long ago. Old wooden stairs descended into the darkness. The smell was like nothing Jenson had ever encountered before in his life. Unbreathable, thick, foul air as if it came from another world, a world of fermented death. "No, please. I can't breathe," Susan said. Her eyes watered. "I just can't." Behind them, the old woman with the knife appeared at the end of the short hallway and stopped. Her head tilted and she screamed. The sound was not sharp and shrill like before. This time, it was deep. rough, evil. That was all it took. Jenson pulled Susan inside onto the first wooden step, and he slammed the door just as he heard the knife impact it, stabbing the old rotten door. Then as they stood there in the stench-filled darkness, complete and total darkness, they heard it. She was pushing something over the wet carpet. A dresser or chair impacted the other side of the door. Jenson grabbed the knob and pushed. It didn't budge. She had trapped them down here in the darkness. She knew they would be funneled in here like mice in her trap. They instantly both realized something. She had done this before. The old wooden step moaned under their weight, but held. He slid his palm along the wall to find balance through damp plaster. He was shaking, but lifted the lighter, and it clicked once, and a small flame trembled to life. Weak, orange, barely pushing back the heavy black of the darkness. He slowly turned and looked down the old stairs into the abyss below. They didn't think they could live long in the air down here. They would have to find a way out. He slowly stepped down, seeing only the next two stairs in front of him in the lighter's glow. Susan pressed her hand to his belt and followed blind, breathing in tiny sips through her sleeve. The air was heavy, damp, hot, sour. He took the last few steps down, and his boot struck the cluttered dirt floor. The flame quivered. For a moment it seemed the light wouldn't reach. And then it did. Jenson froze. Bones. A scatter across the dirt floor like a child had dropped a box of chalk. Long bones white as driftwood. A rib cage pulled apart. Bits of cloth clung to them. Shirts, dresses, jeans with knees blown out. A sneaker still laced, and among it all, small skulls. His stomach turned. He bent over and vomited onto the dirt. Not from the ammonia that burned his sinuses, not from the piss and feces that caked the floor in patches, but because he knew the stories. He remembered the articles he read during slow days at the dealership. Oh my God, he choked. The news. The missing. It's them. This has to be them. The lighter shook in his hand. The small skulls glimmered back at him in the orange light, a child's teeth still crooked, a lock of hair matted to one. Susan gasped, her body clamping against his, her nails biting into his shirt. The flame wavered. Above them the floor creaked, then stomped. Dust sifted down through the cracks, and the old woman's voice started, singing. High, cracked, giddy. Din din time for my babies. Time to eat, what a treat. Mommy brought the big, big meat. She sang it like a lullaby, bare feet thumping in rhythm, boards shrieking with her dance above outside the door that entombed them. Susan pressed her face into his back, trembling, choking on sobs she couldn't swallow. The lighter flame guttered and caught again. That was when the eyes blinked on, not blinked, shimmered. A dozen first, then 2 dozen, then more than he could count. The black at the edges of the room filled with points of dull green, yellow, silver, huddled in piles low to the ground, watching, waiting. Jenson's throat closed. Jesus Christ, he whispered. The eyes began to move, closer. The sound came next, long ingrown claws ticking across bone, the rasp of bodies slithering over each other. Then, the hissing started low and warbly and multiplied until it was one long shriek of hunger. Cats. Dozens upon dozens, if you could still call them cats. Filthy, patchy, infected with maggot-filled fur stuck in mats, tails lashing, ears torn and ragged. They snarled and spat, shoving, clawing, climbing over one another to get closer. The floor rippled with them, a tangled tide of fur and teeth. Susan's scream tore out before she could stop it. One came forward, larger than the rest, its head grotesque, half-scalped from old wounds, matted with dried gore. Its face was more scar than skin. It opened its jaws, and the teeth were thin, needle-sharp. Its eyes were missing, but it knew how to navigate this darkness without them. They moved backwards up the stairs, and as they did, the lighter went out. Darkness swallowed them. Susan screamed, high and ragged, so close Jenson thought his eardrum must have ruptured. Her body jolted against him. The first bite came at her calf, not a nip, but a greedy ripping of flesh. She shrieked, knees buckling as the flesh tore away, and her screams rose so loud it felt like the whole house would collapse around it. Blood ran hot down her leg, and the cat smelled it. They fought for the chunk torn loose, snapping and snarling, tails whipping in frenzy. Susan staggered, gasping. "They're eating me! Oh God, please help! Please do something!" Jenson fumbled with the lighter, flicking it hard. Sparks. Then a flash of orange. For 1 second he saw the swarm lapping at her leg, like piranhas he saw in a movie. Something hit his thigh, hard, dirty nails burying into muscle. Teeth sank into his hand, and he felt the crunch of bone. His pinky finger tore loose, blood hot and slick. He howled in pain, flinging the cat into the darkness where it impacted the far wall. Above, the old woman sang louder, her voice cracking with delight. "Eat, my babies, eat! So sweet, what a treat! Mama brought you the big, big meat." The boards above them quaked as she stomped and clapped. Jenson dragged and pulled Susan back up the stairs, kicking, slamming his boot into snarling faces, shoving them off her leg. The lighter caught again. Weak flame. Jittering. He saw eyes glinting all around them, jaws snapping, bloody claws and deep sounds as the cats poured upward after them, their hissing rising into a single, hellish chord. Susan sobbed and screamed, kicking blindly as claws raked her legs. Blood slicked the steps, making them slip. Jenson heaved her up, teeth clenched, screaming in pain as more claws tore into his back. The old woman's voice rose into a shriek of ecstasy above them. Susan screamed to him for help. "Get them off me, please! Please help me! Please!" His heart tore. He tried. God, he tried. His hands ripped at fur, at slick bodies twisting in his grip. His fingers slipped in blood, his own and hers. Teeth closed on his forearm, grinding against bone. He bellowed and slammed it against the railing until the cat let go, dangling broken, before it vanished into the swarm below. The steps below were buried, cats upon cats, packed and writhing, eyes shining wet in the light, fur missing in patches, sores splitting open, teeth slick with blood. They fought each other for flesh, clawing over Susan's leg, each one snapping at the blood running down. And then his own scream tore out. Pure rage. Seeing his wife in pain, a power boiled up inside of him, like he hadn't felt since game day in college. Adrenaline and a pure will to survive, to protect, and to punish rose up inside him as he pulled them against the closed door. Behind it, the witch danced on the boards, singing louder, laughing so shrill it felt like glass in their ears. "Move!" Jenson roared, pushing her against the wall for space on the last stair. He roared and drove his shoulder into the wood again. A crack shot through it, revealing light down the middle. Splinters cut his cheek. Again. Harder. Harder. The frame screamed. The witch stopped dancing on the other side of the door. Every second of training on the football field ran through him one last time as his body crashed against the door. Crack! The old door blew apart into pieces, and the shelf she pushed in front of it landed on top of her. Jenson heaved Susan up and through the exploded door and followed, pulling her as he went. The old woman was in shock, and the knife had been knocked out of her hand during the impact. She reeled backward, crawling in pain. Her hand, still bleeding from the car window, was now gushing onto the wet carpet. Her face twisted unnaturally, lips peeling back in fury. She shrieked. Not words now, just a tearing animal cry. The swarm emerged from the basement, pouring up, claws clattering, tails lashing, eyes closed, at the brightness many of them had never witnessed. They smelled blood, the witch's blood. They also smelled something new on her. Fear. They used the opportunity to jump past her in the small hallway, and Jenson grabbed the knife as they clambered over the pile of debris towards the newspaper-covered window. Behind them, the witch tried to crawl away, clawing at the floor, but her babies piled onto her first. "No!" she shrieked, voice cracking, then turning stern. "Not Mommy!" Jenson glanced back as they managed to make it to the window. The witch was reaching out towards them with fear in her eyes as her babies began to feed. They swarmed her, Her scream went high, then broke, then went wet. Hands scrabbled, nails peeling back, reaching as her face disappeared under a heaving tide of fur and claws. Her voice gurgled, choked, then was gone. Jenson used a wooden chair and the old window broke easily, and quickly lifted and pushed Susan through. Jenson followed out into the night. The air hit cold. Their wounds stung and blood oozed from everywhere, but they ran. Susan sobbed uncontrollably as they stumbled down the rutted road. Her legs were slick, blood soaking through her stockings, her hands shaking so hard they couldn't close. Behind them, the house echoed with the sound of animals feeding. They staggered down the rutted track, neither spoke. Not running anymore, they just moved forward, step after brutal step. At the end of the lane, the county road stretched black under the stars. No traffic. No sound but the crickets and wind through the ocean of corn surrounding them. Then, headlights. Far off at first, a dull glow on the horizon. Then closer, growing until the beams cut across them, swallowing them in white. Susan was too weak to stand and laid on the blacktop with one arm raised, her face a mask of pain and exhaustion. Jenson stood, arms wide, waving them back and forth. A farm truck rattled up, brakes squealing as it slowed. The driver leaned out, a farmer, his face slack with shock. Christ almighty. Jenson collapsed on his knees, silently thanking God and sobbing. The farmer got out truck idling, boots crunching asphalt and gravel towards them. His eyes darted from their torn clothes to the blood, the dirt, the gashes. Jenson got one arm under Susan, and the farmer helped carry her and get her into the cab of his truck. The seat vinyl squeaked under their soaked clothes. The stink filled it fast. Iron, piss, sweat, ammonia that clung to them from the house. The truck roared forward, engine whining, gravel spitting behind. Susan curled against Jenson, shaking uncontrollably, her face pressed into his chest. He held her, his own hands trembling so bad he could barely keep her still. As they passed the road leading back toward the old house, his guts liquefied. She was there, standing in the darkness at the edge of the road, just inside the corn, covered in blood, surrounded by cats, smiling and waving. Within an hour of the farmer dropping them off at the emergency room, Clinton County deputies were already navigating police cruisers through the rutted dirt lane with spotlights blazing. They approached the dark farmhouse with guns drawn and flashlights uncovering the dark secrets held within the witch's house. Inside, they found the narrow path, the wet carpet, the shattered door, just as Jenson reported, and the blood and filth on the floor outside of it. And down in the basement, they found the remains. A crime scene that would forever put the county on the map. 12 confirmed individuals, the coroner would say later, adults and children, some decades old, some so fresh the cartilage not consumed had not fully dried. Years later, DNA would confirm the individuals as what would become known as the witch's dozen. The irrigation retaining pond out back was dredged, and it gave up 3 cars, frames pulled from green algae, upholstery rotten, license plates still legible. But the deputies found no sign of the old woman. There was no body. No trace of Amelia Hutchins, the old woman who owned the house that the world named the Corn Witch. But they followed the claw marks from the basement and into the corn, prints that followed one set of barefoot human footprints out into the darkness of the rows. Deputies and volunteers armed with shotguns and deer rifles, eager for vengeance and to end the tension that boiled in the community. They searched for weeks and even harvested many fields early in pursuit of the witch. Some say she died in some remote place. Others say the cats chased her down and consumed her. Others refused to believe the story, claiming a tale crafted by outsiders for fame, glory, or a political distraction, as it was an election year. But locals all knew the strange, quiet woman that lived down that lane as Amelia Hutchins. But after that night, she was never seen or heard from again. These days, even many years later in Clinton County, farmers still lock their doors at dusk. Mothers still tell their children not to wander the fields alone. Hunters still bypass the county, looking for game in other places. And the children, well, they still sing the rhyme and dare each other to enter into the corn at night. When the tassels shake and the daylight's torn, the corn witch waits inside the rows of corn. She'll smile with broken teeth and yellow grin, and if you're not careful, she'll pull you in. Never, ever to be seen again. They still chant the same thing at sleepovers, still whisper it on the school bus, and teenagers to this day still pull over cars and dare each other to walk into the rows at night. The only change is now they say this: if you stand alone in the fields, with eyes closed and arms outstretched wide, after you say the rhyme, you can still hear her breathing, wet and ragged. But now you can also hear the cats, rotten and starving, and ready to feed. Jenson and Susan left the hospital weeks later. Both were treated for sepsis from the many wounds from that horrible night. They returned home, but not as the same people, not as the same connected childless couple. In the years to follow, Susan spoke less and less. She would have nightmares and panic attacks anytime she saw a cornfield. The news outlets ate them alive and spit them back out. So much so that several years later, they moved across the country to the small town of Eagle Mountain in Utah. They traded cornfields for sagebrush. News reports swapped for solitude. And they embraced it. The end. That was The Corn Witch, written and performed by me, James Cawley. A story about fear that grows quiet roots, about how grief can take shape, and how legends sprout in the dark between rows, and about a couple who learned that survival sometimes isn't about strength at all, but about holding on to each other when everything else is clawing to pull you apart. Jenson and Susan didn't walk away unchanged. They walked away carrying scars, silence, and a kind of weight no one would ever see. But they also carried something else, proof that even in the darkest places, even when you're sure you're lost, it is still possible to find your way out. And that's what stories like this one remind us of. That fear can grow wild, but so can resilience. If this kind of tale spoke to you, then you're in the right place. I share a new original story every week, each one pulled from the blind spots of history, from the memories that refuse to stay buried. If you enjoyed this story, please do me a favor and leave a rating and tell a friend. It will help me more than you know. And if you'd like to explore past episodes or peek ahead at what's coming next, visit dustandechos.podcast.com. There are more stories waiting there for you. Until next time, remember this: even when trapped in the darkness, we must hold on to hope, for it will always guide us back into the light.